This is a custom printed magnetic faceplate that I created for the Behringer XR18. It likely would fit the Midas MR18 as well, but I don't have access to one to actually test it. What you'll need is some magnetic printer paper. This particular one I'm using is by Colorway. It's not that strong, the paper itself. It's very thin, so the magnet isn't that strong, doesn't stick on as well. It is a little better when it tends to be a bigger magnet, such as the one I'm using, but still keep that in mind. I did read online several comments of people saying that the Staples brand may be better, but this one worked fine for me. Some items you'll need are scissors, an X-Acto knife or cutting blade, something to cut on with the X-Acto knives. In this case, I used cardboard, and I do strongly suggest you test this out with regular paper first to make sure, at least cut out a couple ports, make sure it fits on your device, because it takes a little bit of time, and the magnetic paper is kind of expensive. As I said, they only provide about an average of 5 per packet. Using the scissors or cutting board, cut along the edges. This is just for the exterior part so that the lines are straight. I found that if I used the X-Acto knife to cut the straight lines, they didn't come out quite as straight, so I used scissors. If I had access to a cutting board, I'd use that instead, but I didn't. Next, get your X-Acto knife or cutting blade. If you have a blade like the one I have here, it's a good idea to make sure that you have a nice sharp edge on it so you can break them off. The blade itself, at least ones like this one, come usually with a little piece on the bottom. You can slide it off, and it's got a slot in there so that way you can break off a new blade, or you can cheat like I did and use 2 blades because I used the back end of the other one. When you're done, make sure you dispose of the blade. I usually like to stick it in tape. This is just some duct tape I put it in. That way you can throw it in the garbage and you don't risk someone getting cut. Next, use your X-Acto knife to cut the notches along the exterior. There are 4 of them. There are 3 along the top and 1 along the left-hand side. And then go ahead and cut the ports on the interior. One important tip I'll make sure to pass along is when you're cutting the ports themselves, make sure you're cutting on the outside of the line. And the reason why I emphasize that is because this was the first one I had done here, this white one. And I pretty much just cut like right on the line, and I wasn't thinking because I made the ports exactly to the dimensions of the ports on the unit, and so they didn't all quite fit. So I had to go back and recut them all. Also, on this example, I was off by a few micromillimeters for some of the dimensions. I fixed all that in the final version though, and on the black one I had it fixed as well. But just a quick tip, make sure you cut on the outside of them. Next, I'll show you how you can make the label modifications in Photoshop, as well as changing background colors, foreground colors, and maybe any other options that you want. To make the modifications for the labels, as well as background color and foreground color on items, you'll need access to Photoshop. I did save this PSD file in an older format, so that way you shouldn't have a problem using it. And in fact, I'm using Photoshop CS6, which is a much older version. I'm happy with it. I'm not a Photoshop expert by any means, but if you are someone who uses Photoshop regularly, you probably don't need to see this part of the video. It's not that difficult. However, if you're not as familiar with Photoshop and you have access to Photoshop, or maybe have a friend who has access to it, maybe this part will be helpful. So to change the labels themselves, you'll open this up. You may want to duplicate the labels group so that way you keep a backup of this, but I'm just going to edit directly in here. So I'm going to expand the labels group, and you'll see I have some subgroups for each row. So I'll go ahead and edit the first preamp, and make sure you have the text tool enabled. Click on the item and change it to whatever you want. So Bob, Jim, whatever, assuming it's microphone, I don't know, however you want it, your setup. Lowercase, uppercase, it's all up to you. The font I'm using in here is Arial. You can change it to whatever you want. I usually like to use Helvetica. I think it's a little easier to read, but I kept it as Arial in here so that way it's more cross-platform acceptance. No, everyone has Arial. Also, when I'm using a white background, I use strong. When I'm using a black background, I like to use crisp. The strong, crisp is usually better for something like this, but it wasn't showing up, for at least for me with my printer, it wasn't showing up as well when I had a white background, so I used strong, and that's in the example you probably saw I had. So I'm just going to minimize this here, and you'll see what I mean. So this is the labels, and I'm just going to turn this off and back on so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Next is the port labels themselves. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to the auxes, as well as I have some for the mains, but they are currently disabled because I just wanted the names across the top, but they are in there, so you can go in and turn them on and off if you wanted to use those instead. Obviously, you can edit these. You can have them say whatever you want. The ports themselves, this is for cutting out the ports after your printout. I also have in here I have port fills, in case if you want those. Because In this example, we're using a white background. I figured why waste the extra ink on your printer since you're just going to be cutting those out. But I did offer it in case you wanted to use it. I also have the dividers. It's a slight gray, a dark gray I should say. So there's the dividers. Let's see, I'll turn those on and off. And then the outline itself that goes all the way around for cutting. And you'll see I have little notches and stuff. I had to include those. Otherwise, if I cut back a little more, I found it wasn't the final magnet wasn't strong enough to it could tear. So that's up to you. You can if you want to keep going more. So let me show you how I did the black background. So if you're a Photoshop expert, I'm sure there are 10 other ways you can do this. This is the way I did it. Worked for me. So in here I created a black background. I just created a layer through a black paint bucket on it. You could do blue. You could do whatever you want. So I'm just going to turn that on. You'll see everything but the outlines or the dividers will show here because they're a little lighter. For this example, I did the labels in white. So I'm just going to right click on the entire group here, go to blending options and color overlay, click on the color, choose white. For the port labels, I chose to go with 6. Just a gray. You'll see on the left hand side here. I just kind of clicked and dragged around until I found one I liked. And then for the ports, I went with 2s. For the dividers, I went with 5. Make sure you change the outline to some color that you can see. So in this case, I went with 2s. And the reason why I use 2s on here is because it's just dark enough so that way you can cut it, but in case if any of it's showing on the final magnet, it's not going to really show, it's not going to stand out. Same thing with these cutouts for these for the ports. That way, if I miss a spot and maybe a little bit of the gray is showing, it's not going to really show on the final magnet. And then the last thing I did was I changed the labels themselves from that strong to the crisp. So in this case, I expanded them all. I'm going to highlight them all. Make sure you have the text tool enabled and just go over to here where it says strong and change it to crisp. So there you go. These are the colors I used in my printout. You can use whatever colors you want. Blue, yellow, red. Have a field day. It's your printer. It's your ink. And as you can see, I made it as fairly easy as I could to make these modifications.